Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to see our regulars here. Welcome to Community Conversations. I want to firstly announce that we have this session, and then next week we have a session, and then we're done for the academic year. But we will be back in the fall with a series on wonders of the world. So keep an eye out on the website for details about that. We'll be updating that when we get more information about it. But as of now, it is in progress. So there's no information up there at this point. Today, I want to welcome Mark Gaither here. Mark is a tenured instructor in the business technology program here at LCC. He possesses an undergraduate degree in science education from Portland State University and an MA from the University of Phoenix in curriculum and instruction. Mark began his full-time teaching career in 1988 and has been operating a part-time business for 35 years, most recently launching a comic book publishing company. So please welcome Mark.
Mhm. And I think you've got me. Okay, good. You can hear me. Good thing about the mic process. I didn't have to turn it on. Courtney unmuted me. So, well, thank you for showing up. I appreciate those of you who are here and then those of you who are online. So a bigger audience potentially. And I know people watch these because people have commented on the fact that they've watched them after the presentation. So that's great. So Courtney gave you a very brief description of me being here. And today we're going to talk about technology, cravings, and fears. But I wanted to give you a broader background around my experience with technology. So this year, I'll be turning 63. I was born in 1961, right at the cusp of what I would call the digital age and the information era. And it's interesting because 10 years before, the decade before I was born, there were some major technological advancements around the world. The propeller plane was transitioning into the jet engine, right? We had the advent of things like color television coming on board. We had some transitions with space travel in the 60s and the late 50s. We started seeing transitions in a lot of broadcast technology, making things easier to broadcast all over the world. There were some precursors to the concept of the internet in that time period. So a great deal of experiences. And then it was 20 years before when I was born, it was 25 years or so before the advent of the personal computer. And so when I started, the first time I ever saw a computer, I was a sophomore in high school, and it was a machine where you typed onto what essentially was a punch card, right? And information was then fed into a mainframe from those punch cards. So if you wanted to write a document like a Microsoft Word document or a word processing document, you typed all the information into a punch card, then you fed the punch card into the computer, and then the punch cards actually communicated with the printer and printed out your document on paper. We're a long way from that now, and we're at the stage where paper is going away, and we're looking at things solely online. A couple other pieces of technology so that I have attachments to, but I didn't see. My father, who was born in 1913, was the first person in our family to own an automobile. He drove a Model T, and that was in the late 20s, early 30s. So you can imagine going from a horse and wagon into a Model T. His grandfather came to Washington State from Indiana in a covered wagon, right? My grandfather who was born in 1876, saw all the changes with the automobile and the airplane and television and movies and all of these things. And so these connections about technology are kind of instilled in me. How do I have that connection with technology? When I was 13, I started running printing presses, and they were letter presses. And then later in my career, I started teaching people how to run printing presses. And I started learning more about paper and printing and all of those processes. And so having taught printing and publishing for 10 years, I have extensive knowledge on paper making and how that technology changed the world. And nowadays I run an online internet hosting company. I create digital versions of comic books that end up being printed onto paper. I have a team of people who are working for me. Some of them are on the other side of the planet. Some of you may know I travel extensively now. I used to hate flying. I still hate the concept of flying, but I fly twice a year, halfway around the world. And so, you know, technology is an integral part of my life. I teach technology, and my teaching process for technology is to teach people how to easily use technology and not make it frustrating for them. Because because we're in the infancy of our digital technology, it's still frustrating. And sometimes it frustrates me. And my job is, how do I make it easier for people? I was teaching online classes in 1990, but at the very infancy of the internet, right? And in those cases, it was actually a local intranet that we were teaching classes within our college. And I've designed digital solutions for companies all over the world. So I have a pretty good idea of what technology is about, but I want to make this a conversation. And so there's going to be a lot of audience participation. So the first question I have for you is, what is technology? Using some kind of tools. Okay. Thank you, David. It's good to see you. Anybody else? What is technology? Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? So I thought a lot about this morning. What is technology? And technology is anything that doesn't appear in nature. Technology is anything that doesn't appear in nature, right? We've had to, as human beings, invent technology. Now, this doesn't mean that other species don't invent and use technology, because we're finding more and more there are applications where other species are using technology that they've developed on their own. Chimpanzees and other apes are a good example of this. Even crows are getting to the point where they are starting to use technology. So it's quite interesting, and they may have been using it long before we have. But the best description of technology is anything that doesn't appear in nature. So here's what I want you to think about. With that in mind, what are the 3 most critical technological applications that human beings came up with? I want you to think of, what are the 3 most important technological innovations that human beings have created? And I'm going to ask you to give me one. So I'm going to pick on people. Okay, so who's got one they want to toss out? Go ahead. Cooking, okay? You can talk to anybody, any place in the world. Toilets, I'm glad you mentioned that one. That's one of my favorites, okay? The wheel, okay. Contraception, okay. Any other ones? Okay, there's a lot of things that we all value as being important, and I'm glad somebody mentioned toilets. Yes, Hakaya, you mentioned toilets, and toilets are great because I grew up in a farmhouse in eastern Pennsylvania, and in that farmhouse, we did not have indoor plumbing. And in the middle of winter, walking through 3 feet of snow to get to the outhouse, right, at night, is not a fun thing to do. And when I go to Uganda, quite often, if I'm going to a village, you are using an outdoor toilet. It's not a flush toilet. You have to squat to use it. So it's an interesting process. So the toilet itself is a wonderful invention. I believe there are three specific human inventions that contributed to changing human life permanently and consistently and continually. One is the wheel. Whoever mentioned the wheel, kudos. Yes, the wheel. Okay. Two is the stylus, the writing stylus, not a pen, not a pencil. Those came later. The writing stylus was simply a stick. Okay. And we'll talk about why that was important in a few minutes. And then the third one is the weaving loom. Now let's talk about the weaving loom first. Why do you think the weaving loom was so important to society? Or kill an animal and skin it, or do something along those lines, right? And it comes back to the question, somebody mentioned cooking. Imagine before the invention of any kind of knife or cutting tool or anything, how did you skin, or kill, carve up and skin an animal without having a sharp instrument to do it? And even if you go back to actually creating those stone implements, you had to do everything by hand, right? So we could argue that the invention of some kind of cutting tool was critical, but yes, being able to create cloth from different materials. But what's another critical reason that the loom, the weaving loom, became important? Sailing. So it helped us with transportation. There's one more. And most people don't know this. Yes, you have a home base, right? Because you're all of these things, then you don't have to go out and collect animal skins, and you don't have to follow herd animals to do all those kinds of things. So it cuts back on nomadic processes, right? But the one thing that actually is the loom is the original computer. The loom required you to develop patterns. Today, when we talk about patterns in computing, we talk about algorithms. An algorithm is simply a pattern of coding, okay? But the other piece is when you look back at the history of the loom, it actually was the original process when we started manufacturing cloth on an industrial basis that we created a punch card system. We had a pattern with holes in it, and the pattern was put on the loom, and the pattern, if a needle was going through the holes, that was a yes that you're going to run that thread through. And if it didn't go through, if there was no hole for it to go through, that was a no. And all computing to this day, every bit of computing that we do, your phone, everything, is a yes, no, or a 1-0 process. And so the loom is what made that possible. And when you look at things like Scottish tartans, right? All of those fabrics that are created, that are signature fabrics, those are computed, right? And they're calculated and they are cataloged. All of that is a process of computing. And when we look back at the processes, when we talk about computing, how many of you have seen the film Hidden Figures? Computing was what people did with numbers before there were computers. Okay, the computer was the person who did the computations, right? And before that, when we talk about inventory and processing and systems like that, billing and all of those things, those processes go back thousands of years. I want to tell you a little story. Imagine that you are a sheep herder and you're working for the lord of the land or whatever it is, someone who owns all the sheep and owns the property. And they tell you that you have to travel a day and you have to take this herd of 100 sheep over to so-and-so, over to Joe across the hill. Okay, so you travel a day and in the process, you lose 2 sheep. Well, Joe, who had met with Fred, your master, months ago, said he wanted 100 sheep, and now there's only 98 sheep. And now you have to tell a story about how those 2 sheep died or were eaten by wolves or whatever it is. And then you only get paid for the 98 sheep that you delivered, but your master is expecting to be paid for 100 sheep. So you come back with 50 bushels of apples and you were supposed to come back with 60. Well, now you're in trouble. And there's no documentation of everything that happened other than your word. So one of the things that we discovered, and this is why the stylus and a writing material is important, we could create a seal. And we can talk about how that word came about. Well, we create a seal, piece of clay, just dirt and water, essentially, use the stylus to put a counting on there, take that clay to the person I'm selling it to. They see it's supposed to be 100, but it's not, it's 98. I explain to them why the two died. They give me another seal or another tablet that has the 98 documented on there, and this is why I'm giving you 50. And then I take that back to my master, and now my master can see there's 50 bushels of apple and not 60, right? And so this invoicing or billing process was created. Seals were what we put on tombs and other places, storage granaries and beer granaries, right? We put these seals on the doors to say, here's what's stored in here. And it was a lock and it had the information on there. And that stylus was important. But where this led to, those of you in the audience can see just below the screen up here, I have a symbol. Can you see that symbol? What does that symbol look like? Anything? It looks like an upside down A. It's actually, when we were making all of these new information pieces, did we have any words that we wrote down with our stylus and our clay? We were just making marks. And what's the easiest marks to make when you're beginning your technological process? Well, yes, but before that, we would be trying to draw out with something like charcoal or berries or whatever, something that looked like a steer. Okay. Now, over time, we use that straight line stylus and that clay to etch out this symbol. I'm delivering 20 head of cattle, right? So I'd mark this out 20 times. We didn't even have a numbering system at this point. So we would draw 20 pictures of cows. Well, if I won't do it, but you imagine me drawing a cow 20 times. It gets kind of crazy. So I just go to lines because it's easier. Well, over time, people would end up turning that cow head sideways sometimes. And then eventually turning it into a symbol that looks like this. And 3,500, 3,200 years ago, the Phoenicians transformed these drawings into these symbols. And they attached these symbols to sounds. What kind of sound does a cow make? And if somebody says moo, what kind of sound does a cow make? It makes an ah sound. Ah. That is the sound a cow makes. Ah for A. And that's how we started building our alphabet. The alphabet is a symbolization of a sound. And we see this in other languages where there are sounds that are very phonetic. The Arabic language does not have any vowels. It's all consonants. And it's all based on sounds. And then we started attaching those letters into words, and then we started writing. And this is why the stylus is so important, because none of our other technological advances would have been possible without the written word. Not one. Even things like religion. Religion became possible because we put it down in writing. And then we started producing it in print. And then we started doing all of these wonderful things. Now, so that's your little story, right? You told me about some of your ideas on what technology is. Now I have another question for you. Think about all the technological advances that we're dealing with today. And what's one of your fears? Anybody? One of your fears around all of the technology that we have? or coming up or might spring up?
Spreading false information.
Spreading false information. Okay.
People become so obsessed with it that they don't have a life.
Becoming obsessed with it that they don't have a life outside of the technology. Others. Shaming people in public, right? Bullying. It's your opinion becomes more important than other people's perception, correct? Yes. Oh, yes, something happens and all of a sudden now it's like, wow, I didn't expect this to happen, right? With the changes. Yeah. I am finding that for myself. Things are changing so rapidly now that it's how do I stay on top of the changes? Yes, right? Now we're speaking to much larger audiences than we used to. Yes, what is real? What is real? There's a great, let me escape from this on the screen here for a second, because I'm glad you brought that up. And this is really, oops. I already showed you one of mine. So now this is where I don't have my glasses. So we'll try and do it without my glasses. Let's see. This is where touch typing comes in. This is a great image, and I like to share this out. Is that showing a new tab? I hope. I always like to share this image out with my students. When you look at this, it is the difference between truth and perspective. So what we have here is a cylinder with two lights shining on it from two different angles. And when you look at the wall to the right, it shows it, the truth is a circle, a disc. And when you look at the image projected on the left, the truth is a square. How many truths are there here? 3. There are 3 truths. The circle is a truth, the square is a truth, and the cylinder is a truth. How many perspectives are there? 3. Which one is the correct one? See, this is the thing that I learned, luckily, early on in life. Reality is dependent upon your perspective. So what is true and what is false? It's a great question. You know, when we talk about media and false news, you know who one of our in America, one of our leading false news historically person was? Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, in the newspapers that he and his brother ran, published false news to increase the sales of their newspapers. And Franklin wrote in opinions under multiple pseudonyms, posing as different people to spread fake news. Our country is founded on the concept of fake news, right? So fake news is not something new. It's just how do you discern, and this is what somebody else brought up, how do you discern what's true and what's fake? Well, I would pose this back to you. What is true? Right? Just because it's written down or has been written down doesn't mean it's true. There's an old adage that we have in print. Freedom of the press belongs to one who owns one. Okay? Technology throughout history, paper and printing throughout history, is predicated on the fact that the people who own the ability to print have the ability to make the truth. And so what we have been taught, and most of you are familiar with this in your history books is that what we were taught in the United States in our traditional history, and this is not true of only the United States, it's everywhere in the world, is not the history of what actually happened. It's the history of the victors who were able to write what was in the history books. And people who had access to power when printing came about were the ones who actually suppressed the people who were trying to write what they considered to be the truth. And for example, said that they were heretics or witches and that the printing press was the tool of the devil until they bought their own. And then they started became the authority in actually putting out what was there. And we saw this throughout history. So it's quite interesting when we talk about false news and truth and perspective. So let's address some of the traditional fears that folks have. So how many of you have a fear of robots taking over your life or something associated similar to it? This is a common fear in technology right now. Anybody afraid of that? Anybody own a robot of any kind right now? Nobody? I own one. It vacuums my floors. It's fantastic. It keeps up with the cat shedding fur that I can't keep up with by hand, and the little litter that it tracks out of the litter box. My little, I call it D, because it's D-Bot, right? I didn't buy the Roomba, right? And the D-Bot just runs around and, you know, vacuums the floor for me. It's so simple and it's smart. You can buy now lawnmowers that mow your lawn, robotic lawn. Who loves to go out and mow their lawn by hand? Okay, now the lawnmower will do it. You can buy window washing machines that will do that. There will be other things coming along. Robots are simply machines that do what we tell them to do. Will they become smarter than us? No. A fear that people have is, will we become complacent? Will we become lazy? And I will tell you that I'm not afraid of robots. I'm afraid, somebody mentioned it, I think you mentioned it, that we become so complacent and so lazy that we lose our connection with the natural world. Because technology, remember, is not natural. It's something that we've created to make our lives easier, which it does. You know, a toilet is much easier than an outhouse until it breaks. An automobile on wheels is much better than using the most reliable piece of technology that we have that we didn't invent, our feet, our legs, right? You can get anywhere on these. And quite often, if you've had to, you know what that's like. The automobile makes it more convenient, and you can carry more in an automobile, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make us better, right? I don't know that the automobile or any piece of technology has made us better as human beings. They've just made it more convenient for us to do things. I just pulled that one off of the internet, and purposefully for this presentation, I did not reference anything, because this is 100% my opinion. If you go back and look at all of the writing on what we crave and what we fear and how technology may have been created because there was a need in society and the technology was created to fill that need, there are other people who believe that the technology drove the want and not filled the need, right? So I could have pulled up all kinds of conflicting references from experts on this. I tend to go with the fact that our technology fills a need. You could call it a want or a desire, but really we wouldn't have invented the stylus without the need to be able to have communication other than oral communication, because it was driven by the fact that we were going from tribes to cities. And in cities, if you're living in a city, you're doing something else and you don't have the time to run out and farm to support yourself. So now you have to be able to buy goods from somebody else in the city who's collecting those goods from the farmers. Well, you have to start keeping inventory of that. So all of these activities that we created led to this writing concept, right? The wheel. The wheel was used on carts, but what was the more, and somebody mentioned it, What was the more important aspect of the wheel early on in civilization? It happened in Mesopotamia about 3,500 years ago. Why was the wheel invented primarily? Somebody mentioned it. One more, to grind grain, but actually one before that. What in Mesopotamia, if you're farming and you're collecting all of this stuff, what do you do with it when you have more than you need? Because usually when you're in a tribal society, you are in a situation where you collect what you can consume in a short period of time before it goes bad. There's the hint. Well, and sell it, so you got to transport it. How do you transport it, or how do you store it? It's the next key. There's a sale coming up next week here on campus. Pottery. Yes, making vessels to store your goods. And you know, one of the first goods that we actually stored in vessels, you'll love this. Beer. Beer, because the thing that we were doing, fermented drinks, the thing that we were doing, because it happens in nature, was we were fermenting fruits and vegetables into things that fermented better if they were stored. Right? So the wheel, the potter's wheel, was actually the precursor. There were more people using potter's wheels than there were putting wheels on carts. Because in order to draw a cart, you had to have cattle and other things to draw that. So you had to have money to make that happen. Ferrying, the art of moving things around, happened after, moving things around on a wheel, happened after people were making ways to store those materials that were going to be moved. We used to do basket weaving and things like that, but what's the problem with baskets that are woven? They leak and they breathe, right? Clay pots are sealed, right? And you can seal them even better by doing other things with them. In Uganda, this is great. In Uganda, they have these shallow baskets that they go out into the fields and collect fruit and vegetables and everything with. And they're woven from fabric, but they're actually coated so they don't leak. So you can actually put small grains and stuff in them. Do you know what they coat them with? It's going to be weird. You're going to freak. Nope. They coat them with, good guess. Pine bark is a good guess. No, they coat them with cow dung. Because cows eat vegetable matter in places other than America. Cows eat vegetable matter, and vegetable matter produced dung is antibacterial. So they coat these with that, and it dries, and it now creates an impervious. They also use it on the walls of their hut, the exterior and the interior walls and the floor of their hut. So robots, no real fear with robots. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Once it dries, nothing's going to grow on it. When it's not dry, yeah, you don't want to be consuming it. But it's cow dung. It's just cow dung, cow patties. They just go collect cow patties. They spread it out on stuff. Yeah. And it's odorless when it dries. In places like Namibia, I want to say Namibia, they use human feces to build the floors of their huts. They mix it with straw and they layer it up and layer it up. Why do they do that in places like Namibia? Because there's very little construction material. Yeah, and there's very little water. So you have to use every resource. Removal from nature. Let's go back to the toilet for 1 second. I love this. Removal from nature. If you're growing your own garden, what do you need to make your garden really successful? Nutrients. Where do you usually get those nutrients? Recycled produce typically, but if you don't have the time to do that, what do you run out and do? You go buy fertilizer. Well, what's the traditional fertilizer that human beings used manure, but there's one actually that if you wanted to increase the amount of things like potassium and other things in your garden, what would you? Human urine. You would piss in a pot, okay? And that pot, you would let it evaporate and you would actually have all kinds of important nutrients that you would be using both in your garden and for other reasons, right? So on the farms, before we actually started making petroleum-based chemicals for farming, we used everything. We used all of our fruit waste, all of our vegetable waste. We used urine. We used other waste. We didn't use, you don't want to put human waste if you're eating meat on your garden, right? Right? So anything that, and everything. You know, I grew up back east and we used the whole part of the pig. Everything we used the pig, including taking the hog's head after the brains and all of that were taken out of it, the eyeballs, all of those were eaten. And then throwing the hog's head that still had a little bit of meat on it in a pot and boiling it and mixing it with cornmeal and turning it into a breakfast staple. Scrapple, yep. Scrapple, it's great. It's fantastic. Concentrated uric acid, which is basically, it depends, but usually potassium salts, things like that. Yeah, calcium salts, depending upon what you were eating. How about this one? Who's concerned about growing human body parts? Concerned about growing human body parts? Anybody? Yep, else? I don't know. You think it's ethical to grow human body parts? Okay. Can everybody afford it? That's a good question. So any fear around it other than, other than those two things? Any fear about replacing body parts that wear out? I had a heart attack 13 years ago. I have 2 stents that keep an artery open in my heart, right? They're vanadium. That's technology. The technology I watched them put them in there. I was awake when they did it, right? I got to watch it on a video monitor and I watched them slide those in there. They joked with me. I said, I'm a little nervous. This is the first time I've had major surgery. They said, that's okay. This is the first time we've done this. I thought you guys are hilarious, right? But here's the interesting part. I'm going to tell you another story. I was at a presentation about a month ago, and a gentleman who works in preventing human trafficking around the world. And he showed a picture of a young girl in Nepal, 12 years old, that they had just rescued. And this has a real technology tie-in. So in Nepal, for about $45, anybody in Nepal can fly from any part of the country to any other part of the country. 45 bucks. Every time you get on a plane, 45 bucks, you go from here to there. Well, Nepal is bordered by India and China, right? And so what was happening was that people in Nepal were collecting children, putting them on planes, and transporting them to one of the respective borders, typically China, okay? And putting them into human trafficking. Now you think, okay, so they're selling them into domestic programs, they're selling them into the sex trade. What they did technology-wise was they outfitted flight attendants with cell phones to alert the rescue teams to be able to grab these children to prevent them from being sold across the border into China to companies. And these are companies that are pulling in, the largest one pulled in $5 billion last year in human trafficking. But this particular company that this girl was going to be sold to was a company that dealt in organ harvesting. And what they do is they take these children, they put them in a surgical environment, and they keep them alive, and they slowly harvest their organs as their organs are needed. Because you can't harvest an organ and hold it for a long period of time. You have to keep the patient alive, and then you pull out a kidney, and you sell off that kidney when it's needed, and then you pull out a piece of the liver and sell that off when it's needed, and then you pull out, and the last thing they take out and sell is the patient's heart. Because you can keep somebody alive on all the other things, but that without their heart, that's it. So they take these 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old children, and they buy them, and they cut them up, and they sell their organs. The guy who was telling, I saw the picture of the little girl that this was going to happen to, and they rescued her. One of thousands that this is happening to on a regular basis. So the concept of growing human organs, and we're close to this. We're growing proteins. We're growing meat. The things that are holding us up here are nerve connections and things like that. But this is a great way to prevent children being sliced and diced, because we now have the technology to put organs in people, right? We've reached that technological stage. Anybody know what this is? This is in Norway. This is a waste processing plant. Garbage, other kinds of waste. This is a waste processing plant. You notice how it has this long, grassy ramp? That is in the summertime, that is a ski ramp. And in the wintertime, it is a ski ramp. And you can actually, not only can you go skiing, but you can see you can go hiking up there. You can actually climb the outside walls of this waste processing plant in Norway. Now, one of my fears and one of the conditions around technology, using our connection to nature, one of the problems with technology is technology produces waste that does not naturally occur. Now, that's not a problem for the planet. That's a problem for those of us that live on the planet. The planet will survive. Dave, am I wrong? The planet's going to survive without us. We're going to be long gone, and the planet will still be here. We may not be here, and we may have taken other species with us in the process of polluting. But any way that we can actually integrate the pollution that we create from our technology into the natural world and use that to enhance our connection back to nature is fantastic. And there's a lot of companies doing that. A lot of companies doing this wonderful stuff. So is it a fear that we're producing all of this garbage? Yes. Is it a fear that we have a disconnection from nature because of our technology? Yes. Do we have the potential to use our technology to recreate, to reconnect with nature? 100%. And there's a lot of companies that are starting to make a lot of money, right? Looking at sustainable natural resource technology that gets us back integrated with technology and reduces the amount of waste. What is the most efficient and consistent method of producing energy on the planet? In what form? Water in what form? No, because it can dry up. Or it can flood and it creates problems. Nope, because it doesn't consistently blow all the time unless you happen to be on Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Yes, but there's problems when you start creating solar. If you make solar farms too large, then you actually disrupt the climate, the local climate. Yeah. In fact, there's a thing where, what happens if we turn the Sahara Desert into a large solar farm, or what happens if we irrigate the Sahara Desert and start growing crops on it? We actually will turn the Amazon rainforest into a desert. Okay, so wave action. There's a lot of technology around wave action on the ocean that literally puts floating buoys, whether they're on the coast or whether they're out in the water, and just this constant wave action. All you need to create energy is motion, right? And you can store that then in a variety of ways. This is going to really trip you out. What is the most efficient way to store energy? Nope, actually not. Not underground. What's the most efficient way to store energy to reuse it? Water. Put it up. Yes. Pump your water up into a tower, right? And then at night, let the water flow out of the tower, put it on a water wheel or a water ram, and create energy out of it. And if you do that every day, you've got consistent energy, because during the daytime, you're going to have other sources of energy. But how much energy do you really need during the daytime? Typically, we need more energy at night because we're doing stuff that we can't do if we can't see, right? So water is a great way to store, because it has, once you put it up there, it's got what? Potential energy because of gravity. Force of gravity is not going away. It is always there. It does not, like the wind. The force of gravity doesn't stop, thank goodness, right? Space travel. Anybody have any fears around us exploring or getting into space or traveling via space or human teleportation, if that actually becomes a concept? I will tell you, there's a recent paper that came out, a recent scientific paper that came out by a group published in a prominent journal that believes warp travel is actually possible. And they posited a method for how they think it can work. And the method, and people who are looking at the method say, wow, that could really work. The current problem that we have is producing enough energy to make that solution possible. But that's never stopped us before. That's it, right? If we find the energy, right? Nice Star Trek reference, thank you. Anybody have any fears about this? What is the primary reason that we want to go into space and visit other planets? Haven't been there before? Curious? Yes, curiosity, adventure, right? Say yours again. Say yours again. In case we can't live on this planet. It's such a resources. Anybody know, anybody familiar with the material tin? What do you know about tin? When's the last time you've seen a tin can? Yeah, you haven't seen a tin can because there's not enough tin to produce all the tin cans that we need. So you're seeing a conglomeration or an alloy of some different materials that are now producing the cans that we're storing things in. We are set. Tin, much like helium, are limited resources. Anybody know how helium is produced? There's two ways. One, we can't capture, right? Helium is part of the sun, right? But helium actually leaches up out of the ground. It leaches up out of the earth. Well, right now we have a global shortage of helium, right? There's enough helium for your balloons, whatever, okay? But when we look at helium for practical industrial applications, we are running out of helium. Same thing with tin. We are running out of tin. And so now one of the biggest ways that we capture tin is through recycling. Because tin mines are exhausted, and some of the largest tin mines I think are currently in China, and those are set to be exhausted in the next 2 decades. What happens when we run out of tin? And this is critical. What happens when we run out of tin? Because what's the largest application of tin in the world right now? It's not tin cans. Solder and electrical parts. Tin is a great conductor. It's not the perfect conductor, but it's a great conductor. And so having tin in all of the computing and everything that we do has driven all of our technology. Gold is another great conductor, but it's too expensive, right? The purpose of space travel, and this is why all of these industrialists, right? Technologists, call them whatever you will, right? Tesla, all of those guys, right? Not Tesla, but Elon Musk, why they're getting into space travel. Because if you can get to another planet and you can harvest the resources off of that planet and bring them back to Earth, you're making buco bucks. But the return on the investment is worth it. You're going to make more money than it costs you to get there, especially with limited resources. So when we start running out of limited resources, right, and we can bring back those limited resources, and listen, all exploration was not driven by, hey, let's go and see what it looks like. It was all driven by a need for resources, right? We didn't have enough resources. We've used up our resources, whether it was land or food or whatever. We've used up those resources where we're at in our large society now because we've grown into these huge cities and these huge countries. We need to go out and capture more resources. And what happens when we went out and we captured more resources? What did we do to the places that we got those resources from? We destroyed them. We tossed the people out. We harvested the resources. Sometimes we burned down entire forests or did other things, right? And again, it wasn't a connection to the natural world. It was a connection to the fact that, hey, we have all of this technology that we're feeding and we want to take it with us, right? We want to take what's there and bring it back. And that's my fear with space travel, is that we're not going there because, hey, this is a cool place to go to. We're going there because we want to take what's there and use it up. And if you look at places like the moon, right? Even on the moon, there's a lot of human garbage now. I just saw a video the other day. Sherpas in Nepal are trying to clean up Mount Everest. And they're risking their lives to pull off all the material, all of the garbage that explorers have left on Mount Everest, including human remains, because now it's creating a biological hazard for the humans that permanently live there. It's a good question. I don't know. Is tin a sin? Some, but not. I don't know if there's an appreciable amount. Processes, yeah. So the question becomes, would we find tin on Mars? Would we find tin on Venus? I think there's probably more tin on Venus than there is on Mars, personally, but it's a guess. We don't know, right? We're going to wrap up real quickly. I think this is my last one. How many people want their flying car? Right. I want the autonomous car. And I heard a great analogy from Neil deGrasse Tyson the other day. Young people now are holding back on getting their license, their permit, because they're waiting for the autonomous car, right? And we saw the same thing happen around when automobiles were being invented. How many of you would go back to riding a horse or having a horse-drawn cart or carriage, right? There is so much work to take care of a horse, and on top of it, you have to clean up after the horse. The horse manure problem in New York City alone, before automobiles were invented, was horrific. There was so much production around trying to capture and collect and get rid of all that horse manure. It was crazy. So autonomous vehicles are going to happen. Self-driving cars. We have self-driving ships now. We're on the verge of having self-driving trucks, all of these kinds of things. Self-driving cars are going to be there soon, probably sooner than fully electric vehicles. Right? The great thing about self-driving cars, I think, is I can put my dog in the car and send it off for a ride, right? And not worry about it. I envision loads of dogs in cars driving around, their tongues out the windows. No driver, right? All right, that is the last thing. Questions, comments, thoughts? Right, exactly. All the potential applications for horse manure. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
When are they gonna have these organs we can get?
You know, I would imagine at the rate we're going on an industrial basis, I would imagine probably in the next decade we'll see major advancements, and probably in the next 25 years it'll be a common thing. You know, I think we're on the verge of you know, they're experimenting a lot with a grown heart, but they're also, the one I think is the more important one is probably the kidney. And a kidney is actually probably easier I think, to have maintain and function than a heart is, but they're the experts. So that's my guess. But it's great. I'm falling apart. I could use replacement parts.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to Mark for sharing your thoughts, your cravings, your fears, and your very interesting little tidbits of information that I did not know about. Oh, what is your fear? Oh, the space one.
My major fear is that technology disconnects us so much from nature. And that it's a good point to say. The best thing I would say, and the best thing for you as a human being, get out and take a walk. Go out and garden. Go out and look at things. They say that when you walk, not only does it benefit your body, it also benefits your mind, because when you're walking, it's a natural process for us to take in and move and look at all of our natural surroundings, which causes more neurons to fire. And so it keeps us sharper just from taking a walk out in nature. So take
Which
a
is why
walk.
dogs are so good for us.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us, and please come again next week for our series finale. I learned a lot.